Over the last 10 years, my brother Simon and I have bought a whole bunch of properties and learned a whole lot of positive but also negative lessons from the investments that we've made. Now, in this video, we're going to explain 10 of the properties that we've bought over the last 10 years, and off the back of that, 10 of the biggest lessons that can help you make better decisions, learn from our experiences, and hopefully not fuck up some of the stuff that I've done as well.
I think it's safe to say that we have learnt far more than 10 lessons over the last 10 years, but we'll break down some of the biggest lessons that we have learnt along this journey, and hopefully it'll help you avoid making them like we've had to. But talking about the first lesson, I don't think there's any priority or order to this, but what would you say is one of the biggest things that you've learnt?
It's funny you say that, man, because when I was driving home this morning from a little workout, I was like, we could actually do a video titled 100 lessons from a 1,000 properties over 7 years, which is what we've helped our clients buy. But I'm like, that video would go on for hours. It would be wicked.
Yeah, absolutely. Too much negativity there as well. So we'll try and keep it a little bit more light today.
Without a doubt. So the first lesson, or one of the lessons that's been important to me and revolutionary for me as an investor, was on, I don't know what number property it was for me, but it was one that I bought in the North Beaches or the North Side beaches of Brisbane during the start of COVID. Now, the lesson that I learned was in relation to market timing, and I'd been learning that lesson for probably the 3 years leading up to that, but that was the first time where massive fear, because it was the mid-cycle slowdown, came into the market. We saw stock markets drop, 35% in some markets around the world, even more, and property markets for that first part of COVID in Sydney, Melbourne and Brisbane probably dropped 10 to 15%. Now, I went and spoke to my father-in-law, and he'd been investing for 30 years almost, and he sort of said, I don't think it's a good time to buy. We should just wait and see. But as someone who is in the market every day with you, I'm like, shit, confidence is coming back from the big dogs globally, but the market was like a year behind what they were saying. And I'm like, I think I have to buy. And then I found a place that was, you know, honestly looked like something out of the Texas Chainsaw Massacre did. It was pretty rough.
I was like a little bit sketchy walking through that for the first time, like peeking around a corner to make sure there's not some junkie shooting up in the back room.
Remember that chain hanging up and stuff like that? And I was like, this is actually creepy. I sort of want to get out of here.
Which goes on to my lesson next. We'll finish off the timing thing first as well.
But, you know, I bought this home. I then knocked it over. And because, you know, not everyone was building at that time either, because people were a bit fearful, I got the build at a great price and ended up building a brand new home and a brand new granny flat, which has gone up in value, has great potential for long-term growth, and has strong cash flow as well. So what I learned, I suppose, is what I'd read for the 10 years before that, and that was this concept of using timing to your advantage and buying when other people are a little bit scared. And that made a huge and a world of difference for me on that property.
It gives you a lot of confidence as well moving forward when you do buy a property and then you start to generate some short-term growth as well, because it's never guaranteed. You know, you're always just hoping for it, but planning for the long-term results. And then if you time correctly, it gets your mojo going a fair bit as well.
I'm like, I just made some money while I sleep. What the hell? And then, you know, that can be a danger as well.
It can be a danger. It can be a danger. But I love what you were talking about with that strategy as well. You know, buying sort of the crappiest house, but knocking it down straight away, because that goes into one of the biggest lessons that I've learned as well, which came into play for the first property that I bought. And the lesson is location is far more important than the house itself. Now, a lot of people love looking at the nice renovated property, at the beautiful brand new home, and they look good. There's no doubt about it. And there's some nice little depreciation benefits to that type of strategy, but you can't change the location. You can't rebuy the location. So to get in a good suburb, in a good pocket of a suburb, onto a good street, onto a good property, it pays dividends long term so much. So when I first started my investment journey and I was looking for that first property, I remember finding a couple, like one little really cute, beautiful, modern, renovated 2-bedroom, 1-bathroom beach shack on a smaller piece of land in the same area that I was looking. And I was like, oh, this looks so good. I ended up missing out on that opportunity and being gutted from that opportunity. But then this property came up that was a lot lower quality in terms of the quality of the property, but the street was better. The size of the land was a lot better. I was closer to the beach. It was a much better location. And in hindsight, that property turned out to be a far better decision for me to make. So I think it's just important when developing your strategy to, not get too caught up in the glitz and glamour of the house itself and be more cautious about the location that you're buying in.
I love that, man. And I think that thing that you just showed me off camera this morning from CoreLogic, they've got an incredible Instagram page, guys, for those of you who like the data like we do. But just even on this location thing, they've looked at 30 years of history comparing the capital cities versus the biggest regional markets. The capital cities have done 150% better in the last 30 years, averaging almost, when you get the total return of 450% divided by 30, 15% per annum. So if that doesn't talk to location data-wise, then nothing else will.
Stumbling across that data was amazing. It just reconfirms what we already know and just another data point to help us make better decisions moving forward. But what would you say is the third lesson?
The third lesson was on my second investment property. I bought this 5-bedroom home up on the Central Coast. Now, when I bought the home, the top and downstairs and the granny flat were rented to 3 separate people for $600 a week. I bought the house for $213K, and I thought I was like the king of passive income at that point in my life, because I was earning 45 or 55 grand a year with IBM in their graduate program at that time. So I was like, 20 grand a year passive income?
Yeah, maybe.
Yeah, I was like, I just need 2 more of these and I can quit IBM. But, what I learned from that property is a big lesson that I've learned time and time again, and that is due diligence and the power of understanding market cycles. So what I didn't know at that time that I actually unconsciously did with that property is that suburb, and actually Sydney as a whole back in 2011, had only grown by 1.5% per annum for the 10 years leading up to that point. So I use that data now to buy every single market and property that I do today for myself and for clients. But at that time, I luckily stumbled on a market that had risen by almost, 8 to 9% per annum for the 40 years leading up to that point, but that hadn't done anything in the 10 years to that point. And so that power of now that I know how to look for that, and looking for it's pretty simple, right? Like buy suburbs that have got extremely strong long-term averages that have done really poorly in the 5 to 10 years leading up to that point. It's no more difficult than that.
Which sounds counterintuitive, but it actually sounds logical once you understand it, because you want to buy a market that's going to perform moving forward, not one that's performed before you've already purchased the property. So looking at that 10-year average can give you a decent indication as to where that particular property cycle is at. But you also need to understand those longer term averages as well, which you can get a lot of that info from CoreLogic.
I had a gut feel based on my own experience that worked. But then Jeremy Shepherd did an interview with Ryan from On Property a couple of years back where he looked at 25 years of data in Sydney. And what he found over that period of time from looking at every single suburb year on year and then averaging it out is that what's crazy to most people, a Bondi Beach had performed at almost the same level as a Parramatta or a Penrith over that 25-year period. But what had happened, suburbs that had done better in the first 10 years of a cycle had done worse in the second 10, and suburbs that had done worse in Sydney in the first 10 years did much better in the second. So that gave me the confidence to use that as one of my silver bullets or gold nuggets. And less than 1% of investors that I've ever met, except professional investors, are actually using that. But the second one was due diligence, because I had these 3 incomes. I tried to get the granny flat certified with the council, and then the council guy goes, everything you're doing there is actually illegal based on the current town plan. Can you please rip out the bottom kitchen, which we hadn't installed, turn the bottom into a normal functional part of the 5-bedroom home, get rid of all of the tenants and, take it back to a 5-bedroom home, which was a huge, huge, huge lesson on due diligence. Had I have talked to a town planner before, talked to my solicitor properly, and talked to the council, which I do all of those things now before I buy, I would have been in a much safer position.
What I feel as though happens a lot of the time, especially with young, more ambitious investors like you and Macca were at the time, is when you see a unicorn opportunity like that, you get very, very emotionally attached to it and you throw all logic out the window. So
That's exactly what happened.
Yeah, of course. $20,000 per year passive income at 22, 23 years of age is
24,
24, is epic, especially when you're earning a low income. So it's just important to have that team of advisors there to lean on, because they're not emotionally attached to the deal. They're just trying to help you and make sure you don't make a mistake. So just be aware of the fact that we're emotional beings that get super excited about awesome decisions. And sometimes that means that we get out of our logical brain and into our emotional brain.
It's so true, man, because I got absolutely stitched up in Michael Knight's book, I think it is it the 0 to 130 properties?
Steve McKnight.
He sort of says, like, just be careful of the regional agent that puts you in the car at 9 a.m. in the morning, takes you to 10 houses, and then you buy the 10th home at 4 o'clock in the afternoon when you're fatigued, and all of a sudden the 10th home is the beautiful one. And he did that to us. He took us around all of these shit boxes during the GFC and then shows us the last one, and we're like, this is so much better and the rent's so good, and we signed it that minute. So, like, you know, lessons learned, but that's all of the fun and games of this, right?
Exactly. And I think the lesson to learn is, like, you know, you can work it out. You know, you worked it out. Like, fortunately, you're investing with a builder who can do a lot of the work himself. But at the same time, like, you can change things around, and then, you know, you still got the result that you wanted over the long term.
100%. And it doesn't, I suppose that's a big lesson here too. I know we're harping on this property, but
10 lessons is turning into 1,000.
We don't have to, and you don't have to nail every single thing. Like, there's things that I do now, like 12, 13 years down the line, that I could never have imagined even a year ago, because I just didn't even know what I didn't know.
No.
And so slowly over time, our job as investors is to learn a little bit more, put more tools into the belt, put team members into that, you know, environment that have other tools in their belt, and to protect yourself and to think about not just increasing your average annual returns and your rent returns, but reducing your risk as well. But I had no idea about 99.9% of the shit that I know now then, and it still worked out beautifully because it was, you know, a long-term investment.
Yeah, exactly. You know, the fourth thing that I wanted to talk about is the journey of a property investor. And it's just the fact that the first property is the hardest. The second property is a hell of a lot easier from there. And then, you know, as you start working towards property number 3 or more, you know, it can get a little bit easier, but it can get a little bit more challenging as time goes on. And, you know, that was a really positive experience, because when I bought my first property, I was at the lowest income earning. I had to save up that full deposit, which took me a hell of a long time. And on that low income makes it a lot more challenging. And I didn't have the team of advisors. I didn't have the experience. I didn't have necessarily the confidence, but you got to just sort of just have that blind faith, or take that leap of faith in the beginning to get into the market. But then from that experience, working into your second property is a hell of a lot easier, because the proof is then in the pudding. You can see it's like, oh, okay, well, if I save X amount of money every single week, by this point in time, I'm going to be able to buy another property. So you have already built those habits within you. You've already been through the process of developing a strategy and reviewing the market and finding the right suburbs and understanding your budget. You've already been through the process with a mortgage broker, been through the under contract phase with a solicitor and a building and pest inspector and a property manager. So the first one is always going to be the most overwhelming property. And first investment, even if you go buy your own home and then invest after that, the investment's going to feel quite overwhelming as well. But then over time, things do get a lot easier, and you can see the light at the end of the tunnel, and it takes a lot of pressure and stress off you, and you can just get focused on achieving your goals. So that was something that I didn't realize in the beginning that has sort of unfolded throughout my journey.
Yeah, 100%, man. Like, I think this month alone, how many people that we've worked with in the past re-signed up to buy again? Like
6 of them.
6. And I've started to have conversations with them about their plans in the market. And some of these people were really, really frightened 2, 3, 4, 5 years ago when they last bought. And now that they've got that confidence, they've been watching our stuff, they've been following CoreLogic stuff, HTW stuff. They're just like, this is a dip. Like, I want to buy the dip. Like, they understand that, and they're super excited, and the fear's gone because they know what they don't know now, and they understand the process, and they are clear on what they're looking for. And it's really exciting to see that confidence build. And it's happened with both of us as well. So my fifth lesson was actually from my first investment property. It was a 2-bedroom unit back in Miranda, in Sydney, in the Sutherland Shire.
Real close to the League Club for you.
Really close to everything that was important to me in my life at that point, which was pretty much the pub. But yeah, it was an interesting journey, that one. So one of the key lessons that I learned out of that one, I actually didn't learn it immediately. I learned it when I went to buy my third property, and that was when you go to the bank and buy with somebody else. So I bought that first property with 2 of my best mates who are still my best mates to this day, and the bank's like, here you go, there's the loan. And we're like, yes, we got the loan. And at that point, when we had beers that night, we're like, we're going to build a property empire together. We'll buy every single property for the rest of our lives together, and let's go nuts. And then I go to buy my third property, and the bank's like, you can't. And I'm like, why? I owe like 100 grand here, 100 grand there. And they're like, no, you don't. You're personally liable for the full debt on that unit. And I'm like, but I own it with 2 other people. And they're like, no, each of you are liable on our record for the full debt. And by the way, because there's 3 of you, we're dividing the rent by 3, and we automatically take 20% off the top of that too. So I was like liable for this 300 and something grand debt, but only on their eyes looking at $100 a week in rent. And so it massively caught me out. And I think the lesson there is, I know sometimes buying with other people, family members that aren't your wife or your husband or friends, is like really appealing because it gets you in earlier. But if you haven't got your dream home yet, and you want to do things that are bigger than the person that you're investing with at that time, then just be very, very wary of how the bank looks at it.
Yeah, and, I talk to a lot of first, second, third time investors, a lot of people that want to entertain the idea of a joint venture, and we don't get involved with how you want to buy the property. It's an individual decision, but you need to be aware of these down the line impacts. And one thing that I've recognized, and, you are still really close mates, like best mates with those 2 lads, and that's awesome. But you're all living such different lives as well, different jobs, different families, different homes, a very different life. So it's like when you're young and in your 20s and hanging out 4 or 5 times a week because you're best mates and that's all you have, it's like, yeah, we can do this. But as your life grows, you become your own person, you start your own family, you begin to have your own goals in life, and you're like, got to rebuild then, because your goals are so different at that point in time. So you've got to also look down the line as well as to where you're going to be in 5, 10, 15 years time from now, and what are your values and goals going to be at that point.
100%, which was really hard to see, because at 24, or when you're just starting out as an investor, I talk to you about this all the time off camera, all you can see is up.
Yeah.
But when you get to the top of whichever mountain you're trying to climb, whether that's 1 property or 3 or 4 or more than that, it's like actually what you're looking for is stability, to be in the present moment and to enjoy your life and find happiness again. So it's like, the other lesson I learned on this property is one that we've talked about many times, and that is houses versus units. So even in the article that we were talking about before, the Core Logic one on their Instagram page, I think houses have outperformed markets in not just the metros but the regional markets over the last 30 years by 100% better?
Over 100%. I believe the growth was around 440 something percent for houses over the last 30 years, and the combined units in the capital cities was about 330%.
So we're talking, 115, 120% better off from buying houses. Now, I talk to at least an investor a week from somewhere around Australia that's been holding a unit in Perth, Darwin, Brisbane, Sydney, Melbourne, Canberra for 3 years to 10 years. And they're just like, I own this $400 to $1 million unit, and I'm looking at houses around me that have doubled in value over that time, and I've made 50K, or it's at the same value, or it's dropped in value. And they're like, statistically speaking, that's a big lesson that I've learned. That was the one and only unit that I ever bought, because the power is absolutely in the land, and the more of it you control in a location like Simon mentioned, the better off statistically you'll be in the future. And I wouldn't miss 100%, 150% gain on a 400K asset over 30 years, and I don't want you to miss it either. So now that we've just rounded out part 5, or lesson number 5, we're actually going to do this as one long video, but we're going really deep here, so we're going to break it into two. So in part 2, we're going to talk about the second 5 lessons we've learned. That video will be out shortly on YouTube. Cheers.
That's a wrap.
That's a wrap.
Getting
Have a
full,
spin.
bro. Yeah. Oh, sweaty. So sweaty. Oh, that's good. That's so nice.
Oh.